That's a payday. Come on.
Okay, so now we are in our third installment of our session on the Payday podcast where we talked to a CPA and a bookkeeper. And I like to bring somebody from my own team on for the third episode to kind of wrap this up. So today I have the best payroll tax person probably in the entire United States of America. Dawn is our tax manager at Payroll Partners, and I had worked at some other smaller payroll companies and gotten to know some other tax folks, and they were good, they were fine. But what differentiates Dawn to those other folks is her obsession with efficiency, a trait that I have as well, and it makes her very easily able to change to make our company better when it comes to all things taxes. And my experience with other folks is they get hooked on a process and then they never want to change off it. And our ability to constantly get more efficient at Payroll Partners, whether it's if we're building an integration to Campbell County in Kentucky or to Rita, or we're doing a whole new child support situation to do our garnishments, Dawn is always on top of it, figuring out the best and most efficient way for us to do that. And so, Dawn, my question for you is, where do you think that comes from? Where did this desire to be efficient and do things efficiently, where did you first start learning that about yourself?
Well, first of all, I can't take full credit because I have a team behind me that does my back office work, from tax to garnishments to electronic ACH activity. And so I pretty much deal with, once your payroll is done, then it falls to my team to cover everything else. So we get all their employees paid, we get all their taxes paid and filed, we get all their garnishments paid. And so I have a great team behind me. So I appreciate the best in the world, or nation, whatever you said. But I couldn't do it without my team. So Liam, Sheila, Danielle, Debbie, shout out to you. But I think the efficiency comes from, I've been in this industry for a long time, from both not just payroll, but accounting as well. Yeah. I started out working at a bank, so I saw all the banking activity and how antiquated that system was, where, people were walking in, they were filling out their little savings book by hand. And then, oh my gosh, we went electronic and you could print that savings book, your deposit. And I watched that go through. That was my first exposure to payroll, was at that bank. I did the internal payroll for our 30-man banking operation. And then I moved into, when it, got some education and went to a CPA firm. And at the CPA firm, we did a lot of tax filings. And I remember that we would have to bring the boss's kids in to process all of that paperwork that had to be mailed to the IRS and the states and the local agencies, if you're in Ohio, to file their tax returns for individuals. Individual people, they go to work, they get a W-2, they come to us. And then we ask for all that extra information. All of that was more paper. We would make copies of that paper. Then we would give them paper copies and checks they had to mail. And I watched that from industry change from an individual and corporate tax filing from paper to electronic. Eventually, they went to mandatory electronic if you were a CPA firm in a lot of cases. And then I found my niche in payroll. I worked for a company that was based out of Jacksonville, and we primarily processed payroll for international health insurance agencies.
Okay.
But we did their United States payroll because even though they were an internationally based company, United States payroll can be challenging from the fed, state, and local processing. And so we had a specialized division in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's really where I found my passion for payroll. What I saw there still was inefficiencies. We were using one software to process payroll, then we had to import it into another payroll set for tax. We were still doing paper filings, and it was all hands on deck, and we took over every conference room in the building to just sort, separate, and spread that paper. And then you put things in the mail. And while the U.S. Post Office does a great job typically, things get lost. Yeah. And then it hits an IRS warehouse where there are 150 million other returns sitting there waiting to be processed, and they get lost in the mail. So part of that efficiency is, let's remove the paper. And we've done that in the several years since I've been with Payroll Partners, in that everything that we can currently file electronically, even if we're not required to, we do. Because we have such a large base here in Northern Kentucky, I've actually talked to the folks out at Boone County, when they were getting ready to try to go online. We are talking with Kenton County, who is also in the process of going online, met with them both and have shown them some of the other Kentucky agencies that are already online, gone through a couple different agencies in Ohio that have a great simplified process to file online. And I think they've taken bits and pieces of that. Boone County is now fully online. We file all of our returns with Boone County electronically.
So you're not just affecting Payroll Partners, you're helping municipalities all across
Correct.
Northern Kentucky and even Southwest Ohio.
Correct. They call and ask us for information. And I think that's because while we're not big and I only process maybe 400 to 600 returns in Boone County, I answered the phone.
Yep.
I answered the phone. I was willing to chat with their engineers, their technology people. I went to Kenton County's offices and met with their judge executive to have these conversations about what would be the best way to go, giving them some options. I didn't say this is exactly what you need to do because I don't know what their other technology needs are. But yes, we do get calls. We have a few other agencies that we have on speed dial. When we call them, they stop and help us get account numbers for our clients. They don't do that for everybody, but they do it for us because when they have an issue, they know that they can pick up the phone and call me or one of my team members, and we'll get the issue cleared up without any hesitation. Because at the end of the day, compliance is where it is for our clients.
So I like to throw this stat I learned out, and you're a great person to bring this up on. I always tell everybody who doesn't really understand payroll across the country that, I think that it's like around 85% of all municipalities, this would be villages, townships, school districts, that charge an income tax with a tax filing requirement, that 85% of the entire municipalities in the country that do that are in Ohio, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania. So this is like the hotbed of complicated tax filing payroll in the entire United States. And, one of our biggest differentiators at Payroll Partners, we do have good software, but like good HR software that's tied to payroll, that's getting to be more of a commodity now. Our biggest differentiator, Don, is you and your team. Because like you said, this is all still very complicated. And, there's certain municipalities, like I think like the village of Marymount, no offense to them, you still have to file with them every month through a fax machine. They're not tied into some of the more efficient things out there. And, now people are coming to us asking, what should we be doing different as a municipality? So I think it's really cool, the evolution of local taxes, and you're all over this in your role as our tax manager. I did want to ask you, though, of those states, which one is the worst in your opinion and why?
So you mentioned Kentucky, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. I would have to say Pennsylvania because they have different requirements than the other two from a live-in, work-in, reciprocity,
yeah.
And especially now since COVID, or even before then, with the remote work. So it can be challenging to figure out what taxes you need to be withholding from an employee that are mandated, and then what becomes what we call a courtesy tax. It's like, well, even though we're not required to withhold where you live, we can make up the difference so that you as an individual employee don't have to file an additional tax return and owe money. You'll still have to file that return where you live, but you don't owe money. Ohio has the same type of issues. They just don't have as many municipalities as Pennsylvania. And in Ohio, the individual employees file their individual returns, but it really is more of a work-in based first line tax. And then where you live, we can also do the courtesy, withhold additional taxes, so you don't owe as much at the end of the year. Kentucky is completely different. As individuals in Kentucky, because that's where I live, thankfully, we don't file individual tax returns with our local agencies. It is truly a work-in, employer-based withholding, and that can be a challenge for the employer, especially when you have remote, to know what those cities and counties are required to withhold in the rates. And the rates can change quite frequently. We recently had a county that changed their rate at their first April board meeting, and it was effective May 1st. No one with a large payroll engine like we have, and we're a small payroll engine, can get those changes made that quickly. It's just it's an engineering issue. Individual employers probably didn't even open the mail until 3 months later. So they didn't even know they should have been withholding more money.
Yep.
And so, again, we got on the phone and I called the agency and I said, look, you're giving us 3 weeks to make a programming change to add a tax that I don't have in my system, and it's going to take a while. They're like, oh, as long as you get it to us by the end of July with that quarterly return, we'll be okay. All right. So then we called our companies that have this small county in Kentucky. And it's like, we're going to do this so that your employees aren't hit with a large withholding. We're just going to take a little bit out of each check that we think they're going to need, and then we're going to fix everything by the end of June, which is what I have to go back to the office today and do. But again, that connection to those agencies, but being aware of those changes in taxes, I think, is what maybe differentiates us, because I don't just see the law, but then I look at our client list and I contact those clients, and I think they appreciate that.
So we're constantly helping, like we are a UKG ready licensee. So we're, there's other regional small payroll companies that use the same payroll and HR software that we use. They probably have clients all over the country who may have employees in Kentucky, Ohio, especially. So we are the ones telling UKG, though, when to update all those rates a lot of times. And we're probably helping the rest of our entire payroll network who uses UKG to get their taxes done correct too. We should probably get paid by all the other payroll companies who use our software, but that's our differentiator. We really focus on this whole concept of payroll taxes. I think it's extremely interesting. I think it's also a hotbed topic that I'm surprised isn't more politicized. I think it is becoming a little bit more. There were a lot of articles being written about work-in taxes, like we pay taxes where we work, but we don't get to elect officials where we work. It's kind of like an old saying in America, taxation without representation. So I don't know if that's something that'll ever change. I just find it interesting that it's not a bigger deal. But we that's our role. We are the role to make sure the employees of your business's taxes are done properly. We're also a big player in making sure they're paid now. So you have a dual role. Taxes is probably most of your time, but you also supervise. We kind of have a separate banking team now at Payroll Partners as we've grown. So you're also dealing with all the direct deposits, all the moving of the money to make sure it gets to people correctly. A lot of times there's mistakes with that, right? People, write a 7 that looks like a 1 on their direct deposit form, and it gets input wrong and they don't get paid. So tell us about the payroll partner process if we find out that somebody didn't get paid.
So we have, with our banking partner, Heritage Bank, we process all of our ACH direct deposits to our employees through them, and everything goes out to the Fed Reserve. And then it goes out and reaches out to the different banks to put the money in our employees' accounts. If there's an error with a bank account number, either they have a bad routing number, like you mentioned, a 7 instead of a 1, or they input it wrong, they didn't send us a copy of a voided check, they just wrote it down. What happens there is our bank comes back and says, we tried to pay this employee, we're really sorry, but we couldn't. Here's the money back, figure out what to do with it. We are immediately on those emails every morning, and we email our clients, and we say, John Smith's direct deposit rejected. He's not been paid. Get us new account information, or if you want to write him a check so he has information, he has his money today, then we'll give it back to you. You write him a check.
So we're proactive.
Yes, very much so.
We're sometimes knowing before the employee even knows.
Yes,
we're on it.
Typically, if they process a check date on Friday, we typically know by Wednesday, if not sooner, that employee's check or deposit rejected, and we are on them. We maintain that list. We're checking in every day or two. If we haven't heard back, oh yeah, it was a 7 instead of a 1, or oh, he closed that account and he opened a new one. Here's his new information, and we immediately push that money to that employee. We try very hard to never let anybody go a week without their paycheck.
So my claim to fame, I've been at Payroll Partners over a couple years. I try so hard. I've only, out of the couple hundred payrolls I've signed up, I think there was 2 that had live checks. So I want to go backwards to when Dawn had her first live paycheck. What job did you have? What was your first payroll job? And is there anything you learned in that job that you still use today?
Yes. I was 16 and a half, had just got my driver's license, and got a job at Po Folks Restaurant. Po Folks Restaurant. So I was a server, and I made $1.75 an hour, so that might date me a little bit from a minimum wage perspective, plus my tips. And I got my first paycheck, and it was $1.12. I threw it away. It was $1.12. It was going to take me more in gas to go to the bank on a Saturday on my day off. What I learned then was I don't want to be in the service industry. I don't want to be in the restaurant industry.
You made some accounting person angry by not cashing that check. That was $1.
I'm sure I did.
Their books weren't balancing because of you.
I'm sure I did.
You know that now.
But it's interesting because now I roll that out into what I see in Payroll Partners, because we do have a lot of folks in the hospitality industry, restaurants and servers, and I see those 50-cent checks and those $1.12 checks. And I understand why they're not cashing them, or why they hold on to them for 3 months and go cash all of them that totaled $18. I get it.
Yep.
So those are clients that we're actually trying to proactively get them to either move to pay cards or move to direct deposit, just so those, because they get cash out tips. They don't get paid typically through payroll. They get cashed out at the end of the night. So those paychecks are really just to facilitate paying some taxes for them with their minimum wage rates.
Yep.
So I understand why we're sitting on the number of outstanding checks for less than $10. But again, we proactively are reaching out to those clients saying, hey, can you tell John Smith to go out and cash his 14 checks from the last 14 weeks? So because I don't want to have to send the money to the state.
Yep, exactly. And you helped me on a hospitality client once. You probably know this off the top of your head. So what tax gets paid first? Out of all the taxes locally, what's the order? You probably know this for hospitality, because there may not always be enough money on the wage to pay all the taxes due for a tipped employee. So what's the order?
Local taxes get paid first.
Because first.
There's no exemption to be able to short pay from a tipped perspective.
Gotcha.
Then we go to the FICA and Medicare.
Social Security, Medicare.
There are options to be able to short pay those with the IRS, but the employee ultimately has to make that up when they file their individual tax returns. It's basically uncollected tax on tips. And then we go to federal and state.
Then we go to federal and state, and they could owe money on their federal income tax or their state income tax. But that's the order. Usually there's enough in those minimum wage hourly amounts to cover the first two taxes, but a lot of times if you're a full-time server, getting a lot of credit card tips, claiming a lot of income, you're probably going to owe. And I had to go down the rabbit hole to help explain this to a new entrepreneur who bought or started a restaurant franchise for the first time. And had to kind of explain to them, because they just didn't understand how taxes work with tips. Mm-hmm. And it is a little complicated. And there's a lot of people, I worked in the hospitality industry as well, and nobody understood any of it as far as like the managers, the bartenders, the servers. It's super complicated. And I think a lot of our hospitality clients love that these issues come up with employees that are so hard to get. That is their most valuable resource. They can just call us and get you on the phone and get an answer to their question. The next thing I wanted to ask you about would be, I talk a lot about football, okay? So I have always felt like in payroll, what we do is a lot like the position I played on the offensive line. You had a different take, though. You felt like in the tax part of payroll, we're a lot more like the defensive line. Explain to me what you mean by that.
Right. So I think we're on a defensive position from two areas. The first one, obviously, with tax payments, is that I'm the buffer between the clients and the tax agencies, because I'm the one filing those taxes. I'm the one making those payments. And if there's a problem, either that we didn't do something quite right, or the agency lost it or misapplied it, put it in a different period, put in numbers wrong, our clients pay us to make sure that doesn't happen. And when it does happen, they've already paid us to fix it. So from a defensive position, I'm protecting that client from penalties and interest and non-filing issues. We recently pulled in a nonprofit client, came to us brand new last year, and they had prior tax issues, and they had managed payroll in-house, and they really didn't have anybody who could help fix the issue, so we fixed it for them. We didn't process their payroll during that period, but it was essentially going to make them lose their nonprofit status. That's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, so we helped them fix an issue from years before we processed that kept their nonprofit status active, because we can, not because we should, not because we have to, but because we can.
And Dawn, your expertise goes well above just the local taxes. You helped me with one of my bigger clients I brought on. They had a 3-year-old tax issue. Basically, it was kind of federal and state related. They acquired a company, and then the Fed audit got triggered from their FUTA at the same time that they didn't roll the state over yet. And then it created all these issues with FUTA due to it being an acquisition and a new EIN. So it was kind of an easy fix to understand. But the biggest payroll company in the world who was working on that for that client couldn't resolve it in 2 years.
I don't know if it was a couldn't or wouldn't. So the second thing on the defensive side is that we're the defense between our clients and their employees. Our payroll processing team is making sure that they're being paid for the right hours. My team is helping to make sure that they're being taxed correctly, that they don't have issues. But when an employee has an issue, their W-2, they think it's not correct because they don't understand the difference between taxation with pre-tax benefits and post-tax benefits. And why is my federal wage different from my Medicare wage, from my state wage we help explain that to our clients. We don't explain it necessarily to the employee because we want the clients to understand that as well, because they might get the same question from 4 employees. But if I've explained that to the client, I've given them a defensive mechanism from that employee who's walking in going, my wages are not right, my W-2 is wrong. We've given them an answer to help them with that employee, but now they have the answer to help the rest of their employees. In some instances, we've had a client help us write an email that they want to send out to their team when they've added a new 401k. This is how it's going to affect your paycheck. We help them write that email so that it clearly explains what they might see, what the differences are going to be, and then the employee's options to opt in or opt out or increase their rates. So again, we're a defense between our clients and tax agencies, but we're playing defense between our clients and their employees to help them better understand and be able to explain internally.
All this talk about defense is kind of getting me excited because even though I played offensive line, the most fun part of playing football as a big guy was playing defensive line. And I think if you are worried that the government municipality, you get that tax notice and it makes you feel like, man, I feel like I'm a going against, Joe Burrow or Aaron Rodgers or a great quarterback, and I just need somebody to sack that notice, then they need to call Dawn and I at Payroll Partners. We will not only be an offensive HR solution, but we will be that defensive tax solution that business needs with payroll. Thanks, Dawn, for joining me today.
Thank you.
But it's a payday.